The disappearance. On October 9, 2013, 14-year-old Abigail Hernandez had what seemed to be an ordinary school day. Her time at Kennett High School in Conway, New Hampshire was going smoothly. Abigail was a smart and friendly girl who was always at the center of attention among friends and family. She actively participated in school activities and looked forward to her future. At 2:30 p.m., she left school after saying goodbye to her friends and started her walk home, as she had done hundreds of times before. Along the way, she texted a few friends and, as usual, messaged her mother, saying, "Heading home." Her mother, Xenia Hernandez, saw this as a routine sign that everything was fine and waited for her daughter to return. However, time passed, and Abigail didn't come home. Initially, her mother wasn't too worried. Perhaps her daughter had stopped by someone's house or decided to take a walk. But as evening turned into night, Xenia's anxiety grew. By 5 p.m., she started calling Abigail, but her phone went unanswered. From that moment, every passing minute became more unsettling. By 8 p.m., Xenia called the police. She knew this was more than just a delay. The police launched a search operation almost immediately, given that a missing underage girl was a serious concern. Soon, the entire Conway community, known for its tight-knit neighborly bonds, joined in. Everyone wanted to help, searching for Abigail in every possible place. The search and initial clues. In the early stages of the investigation, police meticulously checked all the places Abigail could have been, including her route from school to home. Surveillance cameras showed that she indeed left the school and was walking toward her house. But at some point, her trail just vanished. The last known location of her phone was near her home, but after that, there were no further signals. The investigation yielded no results. The case of the missing child became national news, drawing attention from local media and national news outlets. Dozens of volunteers, rescuers, and law enforcement officers joined the search, combing through forests, bodies of water, and even checking abandoned buildings. At the same time, investigators began interviewing everyone who might have seen Abigail in the hours before her disappearance. Friends, teachers, neighbors all tried to help, but no one could provide any concrete information that would help clarify what had happened. The police even enlisted the help of FBI agents to analyze the case as a potential abduction. The mysterious letter. A month passed since Abigail's disappearance, and hope for a quick resolution was fading. But suddenly, in November 2013, Abigail's mother received a letter signed by her daughter. It was short but clear. "I'm safe. Don't worry. Don't look for me." Xenia, who had been dreaming of any sign from her daughter every day, was shocked. On one hand, it meant that Abigail was alive. On the other hand, the letter suspiciously seemed like a manipulation designed to reduce the intensity of the search efforts. Police confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abigail. Their analysis of the handwriting and DNA evidence proved its authenticity. This gave some hope, but also raised more questions. If she was alive, why wasn't she coming home? Was she under someone's control? Was this part of the abductor's plan? Psychological aspect and public reaction. Abigail's disappearance was a devastating blow to her family and the local community. But the way the letter affected society was another critical aspect. Psychologists began studying the case, trying to understand why the girl claimed to be safe and why she hadn't returned. In many abduction cases, this suggests the victim is under extreme psychological pressure or even complete control of the abductor. Experts stressed that such letters could be part of the abductor's strategy to create an illusion of safety and reduced the intensity of the search. Although the letter confirmed Abigail was alive, it also made law enforcement realize the situation was far more complex than it appeared. The return home. On July 9, 2014, after 9 long months of anxiety and uncertainty, something happened that no one expected. Abigail suddenly returned home. She knocked on the door of her house, and when her mother opened it, she saw her daughter, exhausted but alive. Abigail didn't look like someone who had just escaped. Her appearance was neat, but it was clear she had been through a tough ordeal. She didn't immediately talk about what had happened to her. After the initial wave of joy, her mother and investigators tried to understand where she had been all those months. The first days after returning, a mystery to unravel. In the days following Abigail's return, emotions were overwhelming: joy, relief, but also fear about what she had gone through. The police began gathering information, trying to piece together the events that took place during her abduction. Abigail wasn't immediately ready to talk about her experience. The psychological trauma she had endured required time to process before she could open up. In addition, she was still afraid of her abductor. It's hard to imagine the horror she went through, being held captive for 9 months. Psychologists who worked with Abigail after her return noted that she exhibited classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, frequent bouts of insomnia, fear that her abductor might return, and feelings of guilt and shame for not attempting to escape earlier plagued her. She often replayed her actions during captivity, thinking about what she could have done differently, although everyone around her assured her that she acted heroically simply by surviving. How the abductor controlled Abigail. Day by day, Abigail gradually began to share what had happened to her. She described in detail how Nathaniel Kibbe had abducted and held her for 9 months. This wasn't just a simple kidnapping, it was a true psychological tyranny. On the day of the abduction, Kibbe approached her on the road and took her in his car to his trailer, which was located in an isolated area surrounded by woods. This place became her prison, from which she couldn't escape. Immediately after the abduction, he terrified her by saying that if she tried to run or warn anyone, he would harm her family. These threats were highly effective. Once Abigail realized that escape was impossible, she began to play the role of an obedient captive. Every move she made was controlled. Kibbe often conducted psychological tests, forcing her to write letters that were meant to create the impression that she had voluntarily left home. The letter to her mother was one such instance. He tried to make her believe that there was no safe place in the world, and that he would always know where she was. Kibbe created an atmosphere of total control around her, preventing her from trusting anyone or finding an opportunity to escape. Physical and psychological pressure. Abigail's most shocking revelations were about how her abductor used physical violence and psychological pressure to keep her under his control. The first few weeks were the harshest. She barely saw daylight and was confined in a dark, cramped space. Kibbe employed brutal methods of intimidation to force her submission. One time, to convince her that he would always know if she tried to escape, he made her sign a contract, clearly outlining his rules for her behavior. He gave her a choice. Either she would obey and live in safe conditions, or he would use harsher punishments. Abigail focused on survival. She held herself together and used every opportunity to convince her abductor that she posed no threat to him. But deep inside, she never stopped thinking about how she could break free. The mystery of her release. The question that lingered after Abigail was freed was why Kibbe decided to let her go. It seemed odd. After controlling her for 9 months, he simply chose to release her. According to Abigail, Kibbe gradually changed his behavior. He became less strict and allowed her more freedom, especially in the final weeks before her release. He even began to let her go outside, though always under close supervision. Psychologists speculate that Kibbe may have started feeling pressure, realizing that holding her for so long had become too risky. His behavior, experts noted, suggested a sort of emotional breakdown. He no longer saw a way to safely keep her and decided that letting her go was the best option. However, even after releasing her, Kibbe was confident she wouldn't go to the police. He likely continued to intimidate her, saying that he would know if she told anyone about him. Arrest and investigation. The arrest of Nathaniel Kibbe was the next significant step in this case. Just weeks after Abigail's release, she provided the police with information that led to the capture of her abductor. He was arrested on July 28, 2014, at his home in Gorham, New Hampshire. The police searched his home and the trailer where he had kept Abigail. They found numerous pieces of evidence that confirmed her story: an isolated room, tools used to intimidate her, and his personal records that indicated he had planned the abduction and control over Abigail. He also had weapons and other tools he used to threaten her. At the time of his arrest, Kibbe remained relatively calm but refused to cooperate with the police, initially denying his guilt. However, the evidence against him was so overwhelming that he eventually pleaded guilty to several charges. The trial and sentencing. After Nathaniel Kibbe's arrest, the police quickly began preparing for his trial. He faced over 200 charges, including kidnapping, abuse, threats, violence, and the unlawful detainment of Abigail for 9 months. Each charge highlighted the brutal methods of control he used over the girl. Initially, Kibbe refused to admit his guilt. The prosecution was ready for a large-scale trial, bringing in witnesses and the substantial evidence gathered during the investigation. However, in May 2016, he agreed to a plea deal. As part of this deal, he pleaded guilty to the primary charges of kidnapping and violence. The court sentenced him to 45 to 90 years in prison without the possibility of parole. For Abigail's family, this was a significant moment. They could finally begin the healing process, knowing that the man who harmed their daughter was brought to justice and would never pose a threat to her again. During the court hearing, Abigail gave a statement. Her words moved everyone present. She described how difficult it was to survive the ordeal and how crucial her family's and community's support was in helping her find the strength to move forward. She also asked the court to ensure that Kibbe would never be able to hurt anyone else again. Psychological rehabilitation after the abduction. After her release, Abigail went through a long and challenging psychological recovery process. The first months after her return home were filled with stress, anxiety, and pain. Her body and mind reacted to the trauma she had experienced with classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder: PTSD, sudden panic attacks, insomnia, bursts of anger, and depression. The psychologists who worked with her noted that the hardest part was overcoming the feelings of helplessness and guilt that often accompany victims of prolonged abduction. Abigail experienced what is known as survivor's guilt, where a person feels shame or guilt for not having fought back enough or not having tried to escape earlier. These feelings are typical for victims of psychological abuse who have been under strict control for an extended period. One of the most important aspects of her rehabilitation was learning to trust people again. The abduction had left deep scars in her mind, and even after her release, she continued to feel fear of the outside world, especially strangers. Therapists helped her gradually overcome this barrier and reintegrate into society. Along with psychological support, Abigail also had strong backing from her family. Her mother, Zenaida, was her primary support during this time, helping her daughter cope with painful memories and gradually return to normal life. The family also turned to special programs for kidnapping victims, where Abigail could meet others who had gone through similar experiences. Return to normal life. One of the most challenging aspects for Abigail after her release was returning to normal life. Her physical and mental health had been severely damaged, and she had to gradually relearn how to live freely. Returning to school was a major challenge for her. Her friends and classmates tried to support her, but she often felt isolated. She had missed a lot of time and had lost touch with many of her acquaintances during her absence. Additionally, the media's attention to her story created extra pressure, as everyone wanted to know the details of what had happened to her. Abigail tried to find a new path for herself, but it wasn't easy. Immersing herself in everyday life was difficult after spending so much time in captivity under constant fear. She decided to take part in a specialized homeschooling program to avoid the added stress of public spaces and the attention focused on her. Over time, with the support of her family and friends, Abigail was able to return to a more normal life. She gradually rekindled her interests, started creating art again, and attended educational courses. She studied psychology and wanted to help other victims of violence and abduction. The community's role in Abigail's life after the tragedy. The community of Conway, the small town where Abigail lived, played a crucial role in her recovery. During her disappearance, the town's residents were actively involved in the search for her, and after her return, they continued to support her and her family. This small town became a symbol of unity, as locals came together to help the Hernandez family get through the tragedy. After Abigail's return, many people expressed their support once again, sending letters, gifts, and words of encouragement. This created a sense of safety around her, which was essential for her psychological recovery. Public events in her support, including concerts and fundraisers for victims of violence, were organized in her honor. Even strangers reached out to offer their support, wanting to help her get back to normal life. Many people from other cities and countries also sent her messages, sharing how her story inspired them to keep fighting. Life after abduction, a new beginning. Over the years, Abigail learned to live with her trauma and found new sources of strength in her life. She became actively involved in outreach efforts, speaking at public events and sharing her story. She wanted to use her experience to help others who had gone through similar tragedies. One of her greatest desires was to raise awareness about the issue of child abductions and violence. She advocated for the expansion of victims' rights and emphasized the importance of psychological support for those who had experienced similar trauma. Her speeches drew attention from the media and various public organizations, and she became a symbol of resilience and strength for many people. Abigail also got involved in volunteer work, helping other victims of violence adapt to life after their tragedies. She participated in support programs for victims of violence and abduction, working with children who had endured traumatic experiences. Her story served as a lesson to society about the importance of compassion, support, and the fight for justice for those who have become victims of horrific crimes. Recovery through community involvement. Following her ordeal and a long process of healing, Abigail Hernandez found her calling in community service, focusing on helping other victims of violence and abduction. One of her first steps was to collaborate with organizations that supported survivors of violence. She understood that many people who had gone through similar experiences faced serious psychological challenges and often did not receive the necessary support. Abigail began attending events aimed at raising awareness about abductions, violence, and mental health. She participated in conferences where she shared her story and focused on the need to provide support for victims at all stages of recovery. Gradually, she became the face of several community initiatives, particularly those aimed at helping children and teens who had experienced violence. She held meetings with young people, spoke in schools and at public events, encouraging children to stay vigilant and not be afraid to seek help in difficult situations. Role in anti-violence organizations. Abigail began receiving invitations to participate in various organizations that fight against violence. She became a consultant for several such programs, working directly with victims to provide them with moral support and help them find psychological services. Her work in these organizations became a form of therapy for her, as she could use her experience to bring about positive changes in the lives of others. One of the organizations with which she was actively involved was the National Initiative Against Child Abduction. As part of this initiative, she appeared on radio, television, and online platforms to raise awareness about the dangers of kidnapping and the need for swift action in cases of missing children. She also helped develop programs for law enforcement and schools to improve communication between families and police in such situations. Through her active participation, Abigail was also able to draw attention to the issue of insufficient funding for rehabilitation programs for victims of violence. She stressed that such programs should be accessible to everyone who has experienced abduction or other trauma, as people often struggle with their problems when they lack proper help. Support for legislative initiatives. As part of her advocacy work, Abigail also got involved in legislative initiatives aimed at improving legal protections for kidnapping victims. She collaborated with lawyers and politicians to introduce new laws that would protect victims of crimes and ensure they receive adequate help after their release. One of the most important aspects of her work was supporting bills that expanded access to free psychological assistance for victims. She emphasized that many victims of kidnapping and violence cannot access quality therapy due to financial difficulties or a lack of resources in their communities. Her public appearances helped draw legislators' attention to this issue, leading to new victim support programs being introduced in several states. Abigail also advocated for tougher penalties for kidnappers and criminals who commit violence against children. She worked closely with activists who pushed for stronger child protection laws, and her story became a powerful tool in influencing public opinion and governments. Founding a support fund for victims of violence. After several years of working with community organizations and participating in charity events, Abigail decided to create her own foundation aimed at helping victims of violence and abductions. The foundation's mission was to provide financial and psychological support to those needing rehabilitation after kidnapping or violent acts. The Abigail Hernandez Foundation became an important part of her life, giving her the opportunity to actively work to ensure that other victims receive the necessary support. The organization offered specialized programs for teenagers and children, helping them overcome the psychological consequences of trauma. The foundation also assisted in organizing searches for missing children, providing families with the necessary resources to expand search operations and raise awareness about abduction cases. Abigail personally worked with victims, offering them support and acting as a mentor. She held meetings with school children, youth, and adults, speaking about the importance of awareness, responding to threats, and the need to speak up about violence. new life and overcoming challenges. Alongside her work in the foundation and active participation in community service, Abigail was able to build a new life for herself. She began studying psychology and social sciences to deepen her understanding of working with victims of traumatic events. She dreamed of helping people in similar situations to hers, using not only her personal experience but also her professional expertise. Abigail also managed to restore her personal life, overcoming the fears and insecurities that had haunted her since her abduction. She rebuilt relationships with her family and friends, who had supported her throughout this difficult journey. While the past will always be a part of her life, she learned to accept it and not let the trauma define her future. The psychological impact of Stockholm Syndrome. Abigail's story contains elements that psychologists associate with Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where kidnapping or prolonged abuse victims begin to sympathize with their captors and even try to protect them. In Abigail's case, her experiences point to aspects of this psychological phenomenon, though the situation was not entirely clear-cut. Kibbe controlled her not only physically but emotionally. He created an atmosphere of fear and dependence, making her believe that compliance was her only means of survival. For example, when he forced her to write a letter to her mother assuring her she was safe, this was part of his manipulative tactics. He manipulated her mind, making her believe she had no other choice but to obey. After her release, Abigail described her feelings as confused. While she was afraid, on some level, she also tried to rationalize her captor's behavior, explaining that he hadn't inflicted any permanent physical harm. This emotional ambivalence is a key feature of Stockholm Syndrome. The importance of technology in the search. Technology played a critical role in Abigail's abduction case. The police used mobile data analysis and surveillance footage to trace her last known whereabouts. While these methods didn't lead to her immediate discovery, they became vital clues in understanding her route and where she may have disappeared. After Kibbe released her, data from her cell phone and other technical tools helped identify his location and the place where he held her. This highlights the growing importance of modern technology in kidnapping investigations and violent crimes. The media's influence on the investigation. Abigail Hernandez's case also underscores the power and influence of the media in missing persons cases. Her disappearance gained widespread attention, and the news spread across the country, motivating thousands of people to get involved in the search or at least learn more about the case. The media not only disseminated information about the search but also exerted additional pressure on the police, urging them to act quickly. Such public pressure can sometimes have a positive effect, as law enforcement agencies are compelled to respond and show results, especially when a case garners public interest. However, the media also created psychological pressure on Abigail's family. Every move they made was closely scrutinized by the press, which made their personal life and the struggle to cope with stress more challenging. Abigail's mother, Xenia, mentioned several times that while she was grateful to the media for their help in the search, the constant attention was incredibly exhausting. Impact of the abduction on younger generations. Abigail's story had a significant impact on younger generations. Children and teenagers across the country followed her story, which brought attention to the issue of child safety. Following her case, many schools tightened security measures, conducted additional self-defense classes, and introduced lessons on the dangers that could arise when teenagers leave school or walk home alone. Abigail herself became involved in such programs, speaking to young people and explaining how important it is to stay vigilant and not trust strangers. Her personal story became a symbol for many that, Even in the toughest situations, one can find the strength to survive and overcome challenges. Family rehabilitation. An essential part of this story is not just Abigail's rehabilitation, but also that of her family. Her parents and close relatives experienced enormous stress, having lost their daughter for 9 months, not knowing whether she was alive or dead. This took a significant toll on their lives and mental health. Xenia Hernandez, Abigail's mother, also went through a process of psychological recovery. After her daughter's return, she felt immense relief, but she too needed time to recover from the stress. The family sought the help of family therapists, who helped them regain a sense of harmony after the traumatic ordeal. Family life changed forever. They began to value their time together more and felt a stronger need to protect each other. The kidnapping left its mark, but also made them more united. Abigail's survival strategy. Another key aspect of this story is how Abigail managed to survive for 9 months. She demonstrated incredible resilience, which was evident in her ability to adapt to the harsh conditions and play by the captor's rules to preserve her life. One of her survival strategies was not to openly resist her captor, but to show submission, which allowed her to avoid physical punishment and gain a bit of freedom. Abigail used her intuition, understanding that any escape attempt could worsen her situation, so she decided to wait for a moment when her captor would loosen his control. This strategy proved extremely effective, as at some point, Kibby began to trust her more, even granting her more freedom. Although this never guaranteed her safety, it gave her the chance to survive until he eventually decided to release her. The importance of self-defense training for teenagers. After Abigail's story became public, there was growing attention in the United States and other countries to the importance of teaching teenagers self-defense skills. Child abductions and violent situations, like Abigail's case, emphasize the need to prepare children for potential threats in today's world. Families, schools, and community organizations started organizing self-defense training, where children learn to recognize danger and react in case of a kidnapping threat. Such training helps not only to physically prepare young people for potential attacks, but also emotionally, teaching them how to avoid panic and respond quickly to danger. Although Abigail was unable to avoid her kidnapping, her story served as a lesson for many other families and children, showing how crucial it is to be ready for any potential threats. Overcoming fear and guilt. The psychological aspect of Abigail Hernandez's case also deserves deeper understanding, especially her struggle with guilt after returning home. Like many other kidnapping victims, Abigail experienced survivor's guilt, where the person feels guilty for not doing more to escape or avoid danger. Her emotional journey after her release involved coping with feelings of fear and guilt. She had to confront the fact that despite her best efforts to survive, she still felt a sense of responsibility for not escaping sooner. This internal conflict is common among survivors, and in Abigail's case, it highlighted the immense psychological challenges that victims face even after they are physically free. Abigail's story, while painful, also provided valuable lessons about the importance of resilience, mental strength, and the necessity of community support for those who endure such traumatic experiences. Her ability to survive and her later advocacy for child safety programs and self-defense training has had a lasting impact on the community, showing that even in the darkest moments, there is a path forward.